Hello again. Would you help viewers to define and understand the differences and partial overlap between astrophysics, cosmology, astronomy, and heliophysics? Sure. What does astrophysics study? It studies celestial bodies. So this would be any physical entity, essentially, which is situated within the so-called observable universe, right? So this could be asteroids, this could be stars, this could be like, I don't know, plasma clouds, gaseous clouds, molecular clouds, galaxies, whatever, any of these, planets, obviously, things like that. So it's basically, you could say, a kind of a mixed science in the sense that it has to use both physical methods. Kind of like theoretical and experimental physics and things like that, and also chemistry, and also, well, that would probably be all, to be honest. Mathematics, like theoretical mechanics, like things like that. Astronomy is very similar in this respect as astrophysics because astronomy also studies the observable universe. But I guess the difference between astrophysics and astronomy is that astrophysics studies like typical phenomena and phenomena and objects, whereas astronomy, it focuses on like the ones that are actually observed. Like how would you say it? Well, let's say astrophysics studies the way, for example, I don't know, cities operate, but astronomy studies like some specific cities. Does that make sense? So astronomy like looks in the sky, says, okay, there's this galaxy, let's study it. Whereas astrophysics says, okay, well, let's consider a spherical galaxy in a vacuum, so to speak. Let's see how it works, if that makes sense. So there is definitely a partial overlap because we have to use astrophysical kind of laws or whatever, like, patterns, which we kind of observe in a vacuum, so to speak, no pun intended. We have to apply them to real objects that we observe in the sky, which is what astronomy studies, right? So yeah, that would be kind of the difference, but also an overlap, right? Now, heliophysics studies the sun, quite obviously, but not just the sun as an isolated object, but also various emanations of solar influence. For example, the solar wind, which exists basically in the up to 100 AU from the sun, 100 astronomical units. Phenomena like heliospheric current sheet, like the magnetic field within the solar wind, the things like that, like Forbush decrease, like the modulation of cosmic rays. Like potentially you might claim like all the space weather is also heavily related to heliophysics, if not a part of heliophysics in the first place, So there's a lot of stuff here, and it's not just the sun itself, right? It's also the solar influence in the system, right? And to a degree, you might say, well, since the sun is a relatively typical star, like inductively we may make conclusions about other stars, even though technically, if you study other stars, this is not heliophysics anymore. It's like one of the branches of astrophysics, I would guess. And finally, the cosmology, it studies the universe as a whole. So, as I've said once, the galaxy is a dot for cosmology. Galaxy doesn't have any size in cosmological terms. So we're talking about like really big distances, really big objects, like galactic clusters, the way they move with respect to each other, like how the universe works in general. Of course, this is all heavily plagued in a bad way by the Big Bang hypothesis, which is completely wrong if you ask me, but that's a separate discussion. And properly, like if you name it properly, Big Bang is about cosmogony, which is like the beginning of the universe or the appearance of the universe, whereas cosmology proper should study like the structure and processes in the universe as it is, not as it began. But I mean, I can't say how Big Bang is bad. Like I can say enough can't emphasize enough how bad it is, but again, it's a separate discussion. So cosmology studies the universe as a whole, right? And then compared to cosmology, astrophysics studies something which almost doesn't exist, in the sense that it is so small, right? And let alone things like heliophysics, right? For cosmology, the sun doesn't mean anything. But obviously, I mean, there are some connections between these sciences. Like, for example, Big Bang cosmology tells us we should have certain elemental abundances because of primordial nucleosynthesis. And heliophysics observes the elements on the sun and is saying, well, you know what? There's not enough lithium over here. And cosmology says, well, screw you. I don't care. Like, if your observations don't match my theory prevails, you know? Things like that. That was obviously a joke, but you get the idea. I mean, there is a definite like exchange of info between all of these. Yeah, as usual in science. Hopefully this answers the question.